Hello and welcome to the first video of the new year. My name's Chris and in this episode we're going to have a go at making a few stirge models, so this kind of thing, you know, the kind of half bat, half mosquito, blood-sucking creatures that you sometimes find in games like D&D. And as usual, you can find a link to the PDF for these down in the description. So let's make a start. Okay, the first thing we'll need to do is make the wings. So for this, we're going to cut out the rectangular shape surrounding one of the wings, just like you can see here. Then we'll score a line down the middle, between the two different colours, so that we can then fold it in half. And there you go. Next we'll apply some glue to the back, and glue either side of the fold together, so that we end up with something like this. Then, once it's had plenty of time to dry, we'll cut that out with a small pair of scissors. It can be a little tricky, so just take your time. Okay, for the body, we're going to take a toothpick and we're just going to colour in one of the ends with a Sharpie. If you have a pen that's a similar rusty colour to the texture, then that might be a better option, but I imagine most people have access to a black marker pen, so that's what I've used in this example. Right then, next we'll need to take one of these textures here and cut that out exactly to size. Though it is worth mentioning that we really don't want any of the white paper showing, so it's probably best to cut just inside the lines to make sure that that doesn't happen. Anyway, there we go. Okay then, all we're going to do now is apply some glue to the back of the texture, just using the trusty glue stick again, and then wrap that around the toothpick. And as you can hopefully see, when gluing it in place, we want the darker side of the texture to be positioned nearest to the end of the toothpick, though we are aiming to leave the pointy end itself exposed. So this kind of thing. Then all we'll need to do is trim away the excess with a pair of clippers, and there we go. And that should leave us with something like this. Right then, this next part is optional, but for the head, we'll take this plain strip of texture and we'll need to punch out a small hole, just with a regular hole punch. Then we'll cut out a slice that's roughly a quarter of the entire circle so that we're left with something that looks a bit like the old Pac-Man character. Okay, now for the assembly. So the first thing that I like to do is to bend the wings around a toothpick, just so that I don't get the underside covered in glue, and then we'll apply a tiny spot of hot glue to the centre of the darker portion of the texture. And then we can simply glue the wings in place, just like you can see here. And when that's dry, it should result in something that looks like this. But if you want to add the optional headpiece, we'll take the little circle that we cut out, apply some glue to the back, and then comes the tricky part. And I have left this at normal speed, just so that you can get a better idea of what I'm trying to do. So, here I'm placing the corner of the V-shaped cutout on top of the toothpick, and attempting to push the two edges down onto either side of the toothpick. So, something like this. It's a bit hard to explain. Then I'll take another toothpick, and use that to push down the centre of the little circle so that it kind of forms a spike on either side of the head, a little bit like Batman's hood. So, something like that. But yeah, because it was so small, that was probably a bit hard to see, so here's the same thing again, but on a much larger scale. So, as I say, we'll place the V-shaped cutout on top of the toothpick, and squash the two corners down to either side. And there we go. Hopefully you can see that a bit better now. Then we'll push down the centre of the circle so that we get a ridge on either side. And yeah, that's the kind of thing that we're after. But if you find it to be a bit too fiddly, then you can easily just ignore this step. Anyway, the last thing we'll need to make is a base. So for this, we can just glue one of the floor textures to some cardboard and cut out a circle that's roughly 20mm in diameter. And for this one, I've also glued around half of the wood texture to some 3mm thick foam core. Then we'll just need to cut out a few wooden planks that will fit onto the base. So here I am doing just that. And once we're happy with that, we'll cut out a strip of the wood texture that's the same thickness as the foam core. And then, after applying some glue to the reverse side, all we'll need to do is wrap that around the edges to cover up the exposed foam core. You've probably seen me do a similar thing several times before. Anyway, here's another one that I made off camera, and we can also do a similar thing with the stone texture to make a few rocks as well. Okay, now we'll go back to the glue gun and just stick these down to each of the bases. It's fairly straightforward stuff. And when we're done, the aim is to have them look something like this. As I say, it's pretty straightforward. Now, for the last part of the assembly, we'll need something to act as the flight stand, and for this, we're just going to use a regular pin. So, here I am applying some glue to the flat end, and then just gluing that to the underside of the model. There we go. Okay, next we'll take another pin and push that down into the foam core of one of the bases that we just made, and wiggle that around a little bit just to make sure that the hole is plenty big enough. And then, for the final step, we'll simply add a spot of hot glue to the end of the pin and push that down into the hole. And there you have it. There's the completed stirge. Once it's done, you can bend the wings into a few different shapes, so that each model is a little bit different to the last. But yeah, the only thing that's left to do then is to make a whole bunch more. And as you can see, that's exactly what I've done here. So, that's how we can make a few stirge models. And yeah, admittedly, they can be a bit tricky to put together, but stirge models, they can be a bit hard to come by. Well, there's a few places that you can get them, but the cost really starts to add up if you want a whole bunch of them. But yeah, that's it for another episode. As always, thank you very much for watching. Do feel free to let me know what you think of these in the comments. And in the next video, we'll get back to making some more dungeon tiles. So yeah, thanks for watching. Bye for now.